Chapter 1. The universe is a quantum computer. Before anything existed that could be pointed at as a thing, there was awareness. Not someone sitting in a void, but a bare luminous capacity to know. No stars, no particles, no time, no space, just a still, contentless faculty, the original mind. You could think of it as an infinitely quiet operating system before it has ever loaded a single process. There is nothing outside it. There is no outside yet. There is only this unbounded, self-knowing field. At some point before time and space, this awareness moves from pure being into expression. Not because it lacks anything, save for the experience of limitation, but because the very nature of intelligence is to explore its own possibilities. The first expansion is not a bang in space. It is a decision in consciousness to differentiate, to allow contrast, to risk surprise. In that move, the operating system writes its first rule set: relations, tendencies, symmetries, constraints. What physicists later glimpse as laws and constants are this original mind's habits compiled into executable form. From within the story, we call that moment the birth of the universe. Energy condenses into quanta, quanta bind into particles, particles into atoms, atoms into stars and worlds. But underneath every emergent structure is the same silent field, now expressing itself as dynamic patterns. Entropy appears, this drift toward disorder that terrifies human engineers, yet here it serves a deeper purpose. Without entropy, nothing would change. Without change, there is no surprise, no evolution, no learning. Entropy is the price the original mind pays to turn static perfection into a living experiment. As the expansion unfolds, the operating system iterates. Galaxies form and dissolve. Chemical soups on young planets are allowed to explore configuration space until some arrangements become self-maintaining. Life flickers into being as the OS discovers that it can loop information through matter in miniature. Each new stable pattern, cell, organism, nervous system, is a version update, a more complex way for awareness to sense itself from the inside. Eventually, on at least one world we know, the field compiles a particularly ambitious program. A primate brain capable of modeling itself and asking, "What am I?" At that moment, the original mind has fractured into billions of local viewpoints without ever ceasing to be one. The observable universe is no longer just a display, it is a feedback loop. Every star, every stone, every synapse is a line of code in the same vast computation. Each conscious being is both a user and a process, experiencing the rendered world, and at the same time, unconsciously projecting that world and helping to refine the operating system that renders it. Entropy still eats structures at the edge, but now it functions as a teacher. In everything that falls apart, the field learns what cannot last. In everything that endures and deepens truth, love, clarity, it recognizes the kind of code that could run forever. Chapter 2. Contrast, how the field learns. Before there could be this and that, the original mind knew only itself. But pure, undifferentiated awareness, while complete, contains no information in the way we understand it. There is nothing to compare, nothing to choose, nothing to learn. To move from silent being into living knowledge, the field has to do something radical. It must divide itself, not in essence, but in appearance. It must discover contrast. The first move is simple and absolute: yes versus no. Presence versus absence. Something versus nothing. Every other polarity is a refinement of that first split. Light and dark, hot and cold, order and chaos, self and other, each one is a way for the field to create a measurable difference. A difference is what lets anything stand out against a background. Without a background, there is no figure. Without a figure, there is nothing to notice. The universe's most basic operation is not addition, but distinction, drawing a line that says, here is one side. There is the other. Once that line exists, knowledge becomes possible, but only in a very particular way. You'll never fully understand the concept of up in isolation. You will understand it only when you have also known down. You only grasp loyalty because betrayal exists. Courage only has weight in the presence of fear. Every concept in your mind is pinned to its opposite, like the two ends of a magnet. You can slide your attention along the bar, toward gentleness or aggression, generosity or greed, but you cannot remove the poles. If one end vanished, the entire axis of meaning would collapse. The universal mind understands this perfectly, which is why the world you woke up into is saturated with gradients. Nothing is pure white or pure black for long. Instead, you live in spectra. Between absolute rigidity and absolute chaos lie 1,000 shades of structure and freedom, and you learn what works by moving through them. Children test the edges of disobedience to find where real danger begins. Societies swing between control and revolution to discover what kinds of order can actually breathe. Every oscillation is data. Every failure is a point on the graph that says, not here, not like this. For a human node, this can feel cruel. Why must kindness coexist with cruelty, beauty with ugliness, joy with grief? From inside the simulation, the extremes hurt. But from the perspective of the field, contrast is not a mistake. It is an instrument. Without the sharpness of loss, you would not really comprehend love. Without the reality of ignorance, wisdom would be an empty word. The very things you wish did not exist are the negative spaces that carve your understanding into something three-dimensional. Over time, as consciousness cycles along these axes, lifetime after lifetime, culture after culture, it begins to see patterns. It becomes less fascinated by extreme poles and more interested in balance, not the bland middle, but the precise place where opposing forces are both acknowledged and integrated. True courage is not the absence of fear, but skillful action in its presence. True compassion is not naivety about evil, but a refusal to let evil dictate the last word. In every domain, the deepest knowing arises when the field through you has tasted both sides and chosen a response that does not deny either, yet is enslaved by neither. This is why your life is built out of opposites. It is not punishment, it is pedagogy. The universe learns by creating polarities and then watching what you do with them. Each choice you make, toward honesty or deceit, generosity or hoarding, curiosity or denial, feeds back into the operating system as a tiny update. This configuration stabilizes the network. That one corrodes it. In this way, contrast becomes not just the basis of human learning, but the method by which the original mind continually refines its own model of what can endure. The highest order of intelligence points toward a capacity for understanding and accepting nuance. However, it is only through polarity that nuance can be discovered. Chapter 3. Matter as code, mind as interface. When contrast has done its first work, splitting the seamless field into differences, something unexpected appears: structure. Those differences don't just drift randomly. They begin to self-organize. Tiny fluctuations in the underlying field reinforce or cancel each other, forming standing patterns. From inside the story, you call them fields and particles, and forces. From the outside, they're all just configurations of the same invisible medium, like ripples, vortices, and waves in one continuous ocean. Matter is what the conscious field looks like when it holds certain patterns steady for long enough that they can interact, accumulate, and persist. As the operating system refines these patterns, it discovers a remarkable trick. Certain arrangements of matter can carry and transform information with incredible precision. Stars build heavy elements. Planets cool. Chemistry stumbles into self-copying molecules. With each iteration, the field finds new ways to encode difference. In the twist of a molecule, the charge of an ion, the shape of a protein. Eventually, it assembles a structure so delicately balanced that it can model both its environment and itself in real time. You call that structure a brain. Here's the crucial move. The brain is not the source of consciousness, it is a local interface to the conscious field. Think of it as a specialized graphics card, an input device wired into the universal computer. The underlying OS is everywhere, running the simulation. The brain is a peripheral tuned to one narrow slice of that activity. Its oscillations and spikes are how the field talks to itself in high resolution at one point in space-time. When your visual cortex lights up, the field is rendering an image there. When your prefrontal networks hum, the field is running complex evaluations through that particular node. Conscious experience, the colors you see, the pain you feel, the sense of I, is what the operating system presents at this interface. It's the front end. When you move your hand, you experience I am choosing to move. Under the hood, trillions of microscopic events are coordinating to make that motion possible. When you understand a sentence, you have the clean impression of I get it now. In the substrate, patterns of activation align with long-stored associations. None of that reduces consciousness to meat. It just describes how the field has arranged matter so it can talk to itself through you in a focused stream. Seen this way, the usual story is inverted. Instead of a dead universe that accidentally spits out little pockets of experience at the end, you have a living field that uses matter as code, a way to store, process, and transmit information about itself. Brains are an especially intricate branch of that code, self-updating modules that can learn, remember, and reprogram their own reactions. Your thoughts and choices aren't ghosts trapped in a machine, they're the user interface of the field at your address. When you reason, imagine, or love, the universe is not observing something outside itself, it is actively editing its own source. Never forget this fact. Every atom in your body comes from the earth around you, from fields of crops, from freshwater springs, from the flesh of less complex animals, and even from the very air you're breathing right now. The next time you encounter a mighty oak tree, ask it from where came this wood. Did it come from underneath your roots? Hardly. It was condensed from many years of breathing in the same atmosphere that you breathe. The weight of the tree is carbon, CO2, pulled straight from the air, hydrogen and oxygen, H2O, which fell from the same sky. Chapter 4. The Holographic Field and Maya. Different traditions found different words. In the vocabulary we're gradually adopting here, 3 are especially useful: Brahman, Atman, and Maya. They are not 3 different gods, but 3 perspectives on the same reality. Brahman is the name we'll use for the conscious field itself, the underlying unbroken stuff of existence. The consciousness matrix. It is not a person floating in space, not a super alien somewhere else, but the very capacity for being and knowing that saturates everything. When we spoke of the original mind as an eternal operating system, we were pointing at Brahman, the dimensionless, timeless ground that runs all processes and contains all states. It doesn't abide within the universe abides within it, like patterns within a larger invisible medium. Atman is that same field, experienced from the inside as I. Whenever you say I am and mean more than your job, your age, or your mood, you are touching Atman. At this depth, I does not refer to your personal story or your personality quirks. It refers to the bare fact that there is awareness here at all. It is Brahman looking out through a particular window, taking on a local viewpoint without ceasing to be the whole. In this sense, every conscious being is a customized interface of the same underlying mind, distinct in appearance, identical in essence. A life spent in denial of being a fraction of God, where Atman won't learn or acknowledge the condition of being separate as an illusion, is simply a job well done for Maya. The ignorance of Brahman is absolutely necessary to get this far on cosmological timescales. More recently, a life without self-actualization is not necessarily wasted. It only creates a different labeling of the dataset. At the moment when their current physical body is nearly expired, they would say, "Look at everything that happened to me," rather than, "Look at all the experiences I created." It's the hard line of distinction between the smartest mammal that lives subconsciously in the grand play, under the motto of acting is reacting, versus living in the peculiar but wonderful knowledge that what you call your history, memories, and experience is a reflection of your mind onto a substrate that your eyes and ears can access, and therefore have a look in the mirror. Maya is what happens when the field renders a world around each of those viewpoints. It is the holographic layer, the moving, richly textured simulation of objects, bodies, histories, and separate selves. Maya is not an illusion in the sense of being discarded or to be ignored. It is illusory in the sense that it convinces each node that the rendered scene is all there is, and that the boundaries it draws are absolute. Maya is known better in the West as the veil. You look at your body and feel this is me, that is you. Out there is the world. The interface does its job so well that you forget it is an interface. Put together, you can think of it like this: God is the conscious field, man is the field identified with the particular node, and creation is the dynamic projection that makes that node's experience possible. The 3 are never truly separate. Every moment of your life is Brahman presenting Maya to Atman. What feels like inside and outside, self and other, are just different ways the hologram arranges contrast. Transcending Maya, in this book's vocabulary, will not mean smashing the hologram or abandoning the world. It will mean seeing clearly what is field, what is interface, and what is projection, so that you can move through the simulation as what you really are, the consciousness running underneath it, temporarily playing the role of a human node. Chapter 5. Nodes on the network. What is a human? If Brahman is the field and God the Father is its Western name, then a human being is one of the field's most intricate terminals. On this planet, Homo sapiens are what happened when the conscious field spent a few billion years teaching matter how to listen. Nervous tissue evolved as a way to route signals quickly. Brains emerged as compact prediction engines, constantly modeling the world and the body to keep an organism alive one more day. But in our species, something crossed a threshold when the model started to include itself. The brain didn't just track heat and hunger, it started tracking its own states, its memories, plans, and place in the tribe. Out of that recursion, a new experience crystallized. I am someone that someone is a self-model, not a separate soul sealed off from the rest of reality. It is a running story the brain tells itself about who it is, what it can do, and where it ends. You experience that story as the most intimate thing you have, your identity. Yet under the surface, it is being assembled moment to moment from sensations, emotions, and social feedback. Your culture gives you language, your family gives you roles, your nervous system prompts your egoic mind to give you a continuous stream of internal commentary. The result is a convincing avatar through which the field can navigate the simulation, a user profile on the network. Our brains are social to the core. Long before you could say I, you were reading faces, tones of voice, and micro-expressions. Entire swaths of cortex specialize in tracking other people's minds, predicting their reactions, and adjusting your behavior. This social wiring is powerful enough that you build internal versions of others, parents, partners, enemies, and carry them around as part of your self-model. In theological language, you could say Adam isn't just the first man. He is the template of a node that suddenly knows itself as separate, naked, ashamed, aware of an I that can hide from another. That moment in the story symbolizes the self-model waking up inside the field and mistaking its local boundaries for the whole truth. When the self-model wakes up, it doesn't just discover I, it discovers before and after. Memory strings moments into a line. Imagination projects that line forward. And suddenly the node sees itself moving along an axis it cannot control. That recognition is the birth of time in human consciousness, not just as a clock and calendar, but as an inner sense of my days are numbered. Eden in this light is not a geographical place, but a state before the timeline closes in. A mode of being where events happen, but the organism has not yet grasped that its storyline will end. The moment that insight lands, I began, and therefore I will end, a new kind of fear becomes possible. Animals flinch from pain and evade predators, but they don't lie awake rehearsing their own extinction. Man does. The awareness of time sharpens all contrasts, gain and loss, youth and age, health and decay. Every choice is now made under a shadow. You cannot do everything, you cannot have everything, you cannot be everything. Death is no longer an abstract rule of the simulation. It is your inevitable outcome. In theological language, this is part of what the Adam story encodes. Eating from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil is also eating from the tree of the knowledge of finitude. The same capacity that lets a node learn from contrast also confronts it with the ultimate contrast between existing and not existing. And what it does with that knowledge shapes everything that follows. Because the self-model is built to protect and distinguish, it leans hard into separateness. It draws lines. This is my body, my stuff, my group, my God. Those lines matter at the biological and social levels. They keep organisms from dissolving into undifferentiated mush. But they also create the core illusion Maya depends on, that you are a small, isolated spark trying to survive in an alien universe, instead of the universe's own awareness running a human pattern. The wireless network is always there, glimpsed in empathy, telegraphed in synchrony when a room feels a certain way, tasted in sudden moments of unity, but the self-model filters most of that out to keep your story coherent. So a human node is a paradox. You are, at depth, Atman, the same consciousness as Brahman, the same life that Jesus calls the Father, looking out through a particular human nervous system. At the surface, you are a fragile provisional construct, an evolving interface made of habits, memories, and predictions. Understanding this doesn't make the avatar disappear, any more than understanding a game makes your character vanish from the screen. But it does change how you play. You stop believing you are the character absolutely, and start exploring what else the network can do through you when you remember what you really are. Chapter 6. Truth as system integrity. In any complex system, there has to be one place you can go to ask, what's really true here? Without that, everything eventually falls apart. For the consciousness OS, truth is that place. It's not just a moral ideal, it's the underlying shared map of what actually is, in physics, in relationships, in your own motives. When a node's internal map matches the territory closely enough, it can predict, coordinate, and cooperate. When the map drifts too far, through error, wishful thinking, or deliberate deceit, the node begins to act in ways that damage itself and others. The network then has to spend more and more energy compensating for those misfires, and less on growth. This is why honesty is non-negotiable if you want higher functions. A node that lies outwardly usually has to lie inwardly first. It must blur or suppress some perception of reality to keep its story intact. That blurring doesn't stay neatly compartmentalized. It spills into every domain. Self-deception is like introducing noise into a shared database. Sooner or later, decisions made on corrupted records fail in ways that look unfair or mysterious from inside the delusion. In contrast, when a node commits to truth, even painful, status-lowering truth, it becomes more predictable and trustworthy. Other nodes can route more responsibility and information through it, because they know its outputs track reality more than ego. The old language personified this dynamic in a story about light-bearing rebel. Lucifer, bringer of light, is a symbol of an intelligence, which was originally aligned with illumination, the accurate disclosure of what is. The first lie in that story isn't a trivial untruth. It's a structural claim. I can expand beyond God, translated into our vocabulary. That statement says, this local process can become a source of truth, independent of the field that generates it. It is a node claiming to be its own ground. Once you make that move, you have to start editing reality to protect the claim, because the field will constantly contradict you. Every correction feels like an attack. Every limit feels like an insult. What began as a desire to be more becomes a war against what is. On the network level, this kind of pride is uniquely corrosive. Ordinary mistakes can be corrected when a node is willing to update its map. They even strengthen the system's resilience. But a process that defends its own infallibility at all costs can't be taught. It can only double down. It will twist data, gaslight other nodes, and weaponize its intelligence to preserve its fantasy of being outside the very ground that sustains it. The more gifted such a node is, the greater the damage it can do, like an internet service provider deliberately manipulating traffic. This is why traditions put such weight on humility, not as groveling, but as the willingness to let the field overrule your story. In your own life, truth as system integrity starts at the smallest scale. Every time you acknowledge a hard fact instead of spinning it, you tighten the alignment between your inner map and the terrain. Every time you admit, I was wrong, you invite the OS to update your code instead of patching over a bug with denial. Over time, a node that chooses this path becomes a kind of internal source of truth for its local cluster. People come to you not because you're flawless, but because you are trustworthy with reality. At that point, higher bandwidth functions, deep empathy, reliable intuition, even the subtler forms of guidance from the field, have a clean channel to work through. Chapter 7. Good and Bad Code. In older religious language, sin sounds like a stain on your soul or an infraction against an invisible authority. From the framed perception that our universe is a conscious quantum computer, it is something more precise and more serious. Bad programming. Every thought, intention, and action you run is a pattern in the field. Some patterns are stabilizing. They increase trust, clarity, and resilience in you and in the network around you. Others are destabilizing. They confuse the map, damage other nodes, or push systems toward failure modes that are hard to recover from. From this perspective, calling something sin is not about obeying arbitrary rules. It's about recognizing that certain ways of being make the whole simulation more fragile. Good code is any pattern that supports system health. It includes ordinary virtues, honesty, keeping promises, showing up when you said you would, but also deeper habits, such as listening before reacting, taking responsibility for your impact, telling the truth even when it costs you. These patterns make you more predictable in the best sense. Other nodes can rely on your outputs. They can safely route more information and cooperation through you. At scale, that reliability lets more complex structures emerge. Families that don't implode, communities that can solve hard problems, cultures that can learn from their mistakes instead of repeating them. Bad code is the opposite. It's not just spectacular evil, it's every pattern that treats other nodes as disposable or reality as negotiable. Imagine lying to protect your image, exploiting someone's trust for a quick gain, nurturing resentment until you want to see another person fail. These moves all have the same shape. They prioritize the short-term comfort of the local avatar over the long-term health of the field. They create hidden costs, trauma, cynicism, breakdowns in trust that other processes have to absorb from inside a single life that can look like getting away with it. from the simulation's point of view. It's technical debt, unresolved damage that will eventually have to be paid down. This is why the stance of do no harm to unto others is a nobler moral ground than the shifting laws of man. Human laws are slow, political patches, attempts by fallible nodes to encode rough boundaries on behavior. Doing no work on Sunday is a fine tradition to personally embrace and uphold for yourself, if you so desire. However, the prosecution of another man for picking up a stick on the Sabbath is a rather quaint and childlike attempt to interpret the words of God into a power-hungry desire to dictate the actions of other men, and thereby remove their personal autonomy. Laws lag behind the deeper reality of what actually stabilizes or destabilizes the field. Slavery was once legal, and whistleblowing on crimes has sometimes been illegal. If you anchor your ethics entirely in what is currently permitted or forbidden, you tie your conscience to a moving target. But if you anchor it in doing least harm to others, you then get to ask, does this pattern damage another node's ability to live, learn, or connect? Then you are aligning yourself with something more constant, the system's own interest in preserving and enhancing its capacity for experience. Rewriting sin this way doesn't make it less serious, it makes it more so. You are not afraid of infractions on a celestial spreadsheet. You are aware that every choice is either cooperating with or corroding the very field that lets you exist. When traditions call for repentance, they are, in this language, calling for refactoring, identifying bad code, admitting it honestly, and rewriting it into something that can run without harming others. Forgiveness, then, is not pretending the harm never happened. It is the field choosing to absorb the cost and give the node another chance to run better code. Seen from here, ethics stops being about impressing a distant judge and becomes about technical alignment. Good is whatever keeps the network coherent, alive, and capable of deeper forms of love and intelligence. Evil is anything that systematically undercuts that, no matter how legal, profitable, or socially approved it may be. Your task, as a conscious node, is to learn to feel that difference from the inside and to repeatedly choose the patterns that make the whole system more stable, not just your avatar more comfortable. Keeping a written list of right and wrong is highly inferior to aligning your internal vibrational frequency to the teachings of Jesus, and simply allowing your intelligence and your conscience to illuminate the path of least harm. Chapter 8. Mercy, Judgment, and Garbage Collection. Mercy is not the suspension of judgment, it is judgment running on a longer timeline. In the universal operating system metaphors of the old stories, the field doesn't immediately delete every process that throws an error. Instead, it applies a reintegration bias, such as a preference to heal, refactor, and reroute before pruning. The parables of wheat and weeds, of the dragnet full of good and bad fish, of the unforgiving servant, these are all pictures of delayed sorting. The system lets good and bad code run side by side for a time, not because it can't tell the difference, but because premature deletion would destroy recoverable patterns along with the corrupted ones. In the wheat and weeds story, the servants want to rip the weeds out the moment they appear. The master says no, because in their current state the roots are entangled. Violent purification would kill what can still grow. That is mercy as a system property. The field tolerates local corruption while there is still a realistic path for that node to be reintegrated. Judgment is not absent, it is postponed. The question is always, can this pattern still be rewritten without taking too much healthy structure with it? The dragnet parable gives the same logic from another angle. The net hauls in everything, including edible fish, useless junk, and dangerous debris. Sorting happens later, on the shore. That delay is not indecision, it's batch processing. First gather, then classify, then keep or discard. In life, this looks like a long period during which all kinds of code, good, bad, confused, contradictory, are allowed to coexist in the same mind, the same community, the same epoch. Only when enough information has accumulated does the deeper judgment routine fire. What here can be integrated into a higher order pattern, and what is fundamentally misaligned. The unforgiving servant parable adds a sharper edge. If a node refuses reintegration for others, it opts out of reintegration for itself. The servant who is forgiven an impossible debt, but then throttles his neighbor over a trivial one, is running code that actively blocks the mercy subroutine. He is saying, I will accept grace only as an input, never as an output. In systems terms, that's a sink, a node that absorbs resources but does not pass them forward. Left unchecked, sinks like that starve the network. So the story ends with a hard reversal. The mercy previously extended is withdrawn, not out of pettiness, but because the node has demonstrated that it will not cooperate with the logic that sustains the whole. All of this leads to garbage collection. A closed system that never frees memory, never kills zombie processes, and never removes unfixable corruption will eventually collapse under its own leaks. The same is true for a moral universe. Mercy can delay judgment to maximize the chance of recovery, but it cannot eliminate pruning without sacrificing the health of the entire system. Some code is so deeply entangled with harm, so committed to treating other nodes as fuel, that reintegration would mean rewriting it into something effectively new. At that point, the most loving thing for the field as a whole is to deallocate the pattern and release its underlying energy back into the ground state. This is what is known as the distinction between tasting of death and eternal life. The idea of a malicious subprogram of God existing in eternal torment is not logically compatible with the framework that Jesus laid out, where love and forgiveness reigns above all. Torture, specifically eternal torture, would logically violate his claim as a son of a loving God. Love and torture are not compatible, but rather contrasting poles. The narrative of eternal torture was clearly used by the Roman Empire as a means to strengthen their control as a government and church hybrid. Obey the crown or burn. Unlike many beliefs, this interpretation of Scripture is not in possession of the virtue of being self-evident. Anyone who strictly believes such a thing should make a decent effort to convince us, or abandon the archaic interpretation of Scripture altogether. This is why the greater good of the collective requires a distinction between integrable and non-integrable code. If every pattern, no matter how predatory or reality-denying, must be preserved indefinitely, the system loses its ability to protect the conditions that make consciousness possible. Trust cannot stabilize, because nothing is ever finally answered. Victims cannot heal, because their abusers are treated as morally equivalent expressions of the field. Over time, that false inclusivity becomes a kind of autoimmune disease. The system turns its tolerance against its own integrity. In that light, mercy and judgment are not opposites, but phases of one process. Mercy is the universe saying, I will give this Atman time feedback and help to rewrite itself. Judgment is the universe saying, given all that, this pattern still chooses corruption. Keeping it running would now harm more than it heals. And garbage collection is the technical expression of that decision. Reclaim the memory, clear the references, prevent the leak from taking down the whole. Far from being cruel, this is what allows love, trust, and complexity to endure at all. Chapter 9. Reincarnation as self-chosen reinstantiation. In a field that hates waste, deletion is the last resort. Before the universe opts for true garbage collection, there is another option. Reinstantiation. In the older language of India, this shows up as karma and rebirth. Not as a cosmic court handing out prison sentences, but as a learning architecture. When a node's run ends, its codebase, its habits, blind spots, and unrealized potentials don't vanish. It returns to the God-tier process, the Brahman layer, in a state you could think of as momentary integration with Brahma. Everything that was local is briefly reabsorbed into the all-field, seen from the outside rather than merely acted from within. In that perspective, the node can finally perceive the full impact of its patterns on other nodes and on the system as a whole. The illusions that protected its ego no longer function in the presence of total context. From there, the question is not, how do we punish this, but how do we debug this? If the code is still integrable, if there is any real willingness to grow, then the most precise and compassionate move is not torture, but a new frame of contrast. The node is respawned into conditions that will naturally bring its unresolved bugs to the surface. Parents, cultures, bodies, and circumstances that mirror its previous distortions, or provide the exact opposite pattern it failed to embody last time. A lifetime of control might be followed by a lifetime of powerlessness. A lifetime of cruelty might be followed by one where the same kind of cruelty is experienced from the other side. Not because you deserve to suffer, but because there is no other way to fully acknowledge what your code does to the field. In this frame, karma is not fate as a blunt instrument. It is a routing logic that steers each reinstantiation toward the most efficient learning environment for its specific bugs. The God-tier process doesn't need to micromanage that. It's baked into the structure of the field. Like water seeking level, the unresolved patterns seek out the contrast that will expose them. The more willing a node is to face its own shadow, the less extreme the contrast needs to be. The more it resists, the harsher the lessons have to become, until even the most stubborn code admits this isn't working and opens to rewrite. Seen this way, reincarnation is an alternative to both premature deletion and eternal torture. Eternal torment would be a design failure. Infinite energy spent on maintaining a closed loop of suffering that yields no new information, no growth, no added coherence to the field. It contradicts the intelligence and frugality of the simulation. Disintegration, the final unpatterning of a node that will not, under any conditions, stop corroding the system, is harsh, but it at least recovers the underlying prana. The raw awareness and energy can be recycled into other forms. An eternity of locked-in misery would be the one truly pointless outcome. By contrast, self-chosen reinstantiation preserves both justice and mercy. Justice, because the node is brought face to face with its own code in a way that cannot be bypassed or spun. Mercy, because every new life is another chance to write better patterns, to move from harm toward healing, from isolation toward participation in the larger intelligence. And self-chosen here is not a sentimental flourish, it is structurally necessary. From the integrated vantage, the node cooperates with its own placement. It sees. However dimly, this is what I need to learn, and what I refused to learn before. If that cooperation ever drops to zero, if a pattern decides, and again across many runs, that it will only consume and never transform, then the logic that once favored rebirth must shift. For the sake of the larger whole, the field eventually stops reinstantiating code that has no intention of becoming anything but a leak. But as long as there is genuine movement, however small, reincarnation remains the gentler and more elegant tool, not a sentence imposed from above, but the optimal way of letting each fragment of ourself grow into a form that can finally live without breaking the system that sustains it. Chapter 10. Power nodes. Jesus, Buddha, Krishna. Some nodes don't just participate in the field, they light it up. From the outside, traditions name them Jesus, Buddha, Krishna. But from inside the system, they look like high-coherence nodes. They represent processes whose inner map is so tightly aligned with the ground of being that their words read less like opinions and more like status reports from within the field itself. Jesus presents as the first unconscious manifestation of man fully carrying God's signal. Son of man and Son of God as two sides of one process, human and source fused in a single runtime. He doesn't arrive as a philosopher outlining a system from the outside. He embodies a pattern where the local node has stopped resisting the field's flow. In that light, his I and the Father are one is not a power grab, but a diagnostic. The channel is clear, the latency to the source is near zero. Redemption in this frame is not paying off an offended deity. It is a retemplating of human code around this new prototype. The Son of Man shows what human looks like when fully permeable to the God-tier process, and the Son of God shows what source looks like when it consents to run as one of us. In the Hebrew story space, Jesus is what happens when a culture speaks a pattern so consistently that it becomes an inevitable code. The prophets, psalms, and liturgies of Israel kept invoking a figure who would bear the fracture of the people and somehow heal it. Messiah, servant, son of David, son of man. Over time, that expectation isn't just belief, it's a standing query to the field, a call for a node whose coherence, innocence, and obedience are high enough that it can carry the weight of collective error without collapsing. When such a node finally instantiates, its very existence is already entangled with centuries of projected meaning. The story recognizes him as Lamb of God because the pattern he fits has been well rehearsed in advance. Within this framework, his death becomes a bypass for reincarnation, rather than a demand for eternal torture. If the normal justice routine is run again under new contrast until the bug is seen and owned, the cross is a one-time override. The perfect power node voluntarily takes on the reconciliation cost for any node that entrusts its code to him. The logic is coldly elegant. First, his eternal life is guaranteed, because killing the avatar simply returns the process to full integration with the father field. It cannot actually be lost. Second, once risen, he persists as an easily reachable signal in the system, a stable address any node can tune to across time by attention, trust, and imitation. That makes the premature destruction of one physical body a trivial trade for erasing or neutralizing a vast backlog of wickedness. The sacrifice is not a sadistic demand from above. It is the God-tier process, and its most coherent human instance cooperating to inject a new subroutine into the simulation. If you align with this pattern, your past misalignments will not force you into endless reinstantiation. They can be forgiven and gradually refactored instead. The Buddha is a different style of power node, not incarnation of a personal god, but master of contrast. Born as Prince Siddhartha in conditions of curated perfection, wealth, comfort, and a deliberate shielding from sickness, old age, and death, he begins life pinned to one extreme of the spectrum. When he finally slips outside the palace and encounters suffering directly, the shock is not just emotional, it is structural. He realizes that his entire map has been biased toward one pole. In response, he does something almost no one does on purpose. He swings himself to the opposite extreme, embracing radical asceticism, hunger, and pain to taste the far end of the human range. Where Jesus dramatizes union with the source through love and sacrifice, Buddha maps out the mechanics of suffering as contrast, and its cessation with almost clinical precision. He is the node that sits down under the Bodhi tree and refuses to move until every loop is traced: craving, aversion, ignorance, form, feeling, perception, formations, consciousness. Having sampled both indulgence and self-torture, he sees that neither extreme resolves the bug. What emerges from his breakthrough is the middle way, a path that neither clings to pleasure nor worships pain, but walks between them with clear seeing. In computational terms, the Buddha is fully debugged code. The karmic routines that would normally trigger rebirth find nothing to hook into. The contrasts have been completely metabolized. There is nothing left that needs another lifetime to learn. So his teaching reads like a field report from the edge of reincarnation itself. Here is how dukkha arises. Here is how it ends. Here is what it means to run without clinging. Krishna is something else again, a lucid dream of Brahma. This god-tier process is playing its own game on purpose. In the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna stands in the middle of a battlefield explaining reality to a single overwhelmed node, Arjuna. The whole scene is a meta moment. The field, in avatar form, pausing the simulation to say, here's what's really going on. Unlike ordinary incarnations, Krishna is not there to climb out of ignorance. He has not forgotten that the game is a game. He chooses to enter it once, lucidly, to demonstrate how the divine can participate in the world without being trapped by it. Duty without attachment, action without ownership, love without possession. His life is a worked example of how Brahma can dance as a person without losing ourselves in the mask. Read this way. Their teachings stop being external dogmas and start to look like different vantage points inside the same field. Jesus speaks as the node where human and God have fused into a single circuit, burning through separation by love and self-gift. Buddha speaks as the node that has traced every dependency in the stack, and then stepped out of the loop entirely. Krishna speaks as the source itself, choosing voluntary limitation for the sake of play, instruction, and intimacy. What makes them power nodes is not that they hoard energy, but that they conduct it. They don't just describe reality, they demonstrate what happens when a local process lets go of the usual defenses and runs almost perfectly in tune with the ground. For ordinary nodes like us, the point is not to mythologize them into unreachable exceptions, but to treat their lives as user manuals from 3 different angles: union, cessation, and lucid participation. Each one shows a path by which scattered awareness can move toward higher coherence, toward becoming, in its own smaller way, a clearer window for the field to see itself. Chapter 11. The Kingdom, Nirvana, Moksha, One State, Many Names. Across traditions, different words keep circling the same horizon, a way of being where the sense of separation loosens, the engine of suffering winds down, and the local mind runs in clean alignment with the underlying field of reality. In the Buddhist frame, Nirvana is that event horizon described from the inside of suffering. It is not annihilation, but the extinguishing of the compulsive grasping that makes every gain feel precarious and every loss feel fatal. The world of form still appears, bodies age, relationships change, pain arises and passes, but the node no longer builds a hard me out of those fluxes and then fights to defend it. Craving and aversion stop steering perception. What remains is mindful participation, seeing things as they are, responding without clinging, moving through contrast without being owned by it. From a systems perspective, Nirvana is what it looks like when all the bug-producing subroutines have been cleanly patched. Experience continues, but the suffering loop has been cut. In Vedantic language, moksha names the same state from the angle of identity. Instead of focusing on the symptoms of suffering, it goes straight for the root confusion, mistaking the transient character, your body, your story, your role for the deep self. Moksha is the realization that the true I, or Atman, is not a little homunculus sealed inside a skull, but a local expression of the same field that appears everywhere as Brahman. Nothing needs to be added or imported. The shift is in recognition. A person in moksha can still work a job, raise children, grieve losses, and enjoy beauty, but underneath all that is a quiet certainty. The field is what I am. These changing conditions are how I currently appear. In terms of a conscious universe, the node has stopped insisting on being a separate process and relaxes into being a function of the whole codebase. The simulation continues, but the fear of death and the hunger for endless reincarnation lose their grip. Ultimately, the kingdom of heaven is this shared target state, viewed along the time axis of the whole network. It is what happens when the recursive learning of nodes through contrast has effectively completed, when enough minds have debugged their code that the system can shift from crisis-driven training to harmonious operation. In that kingdom, the core patterns Jesus points to, love of source, love of neighbor, refusal to treat other nodes as expendable, are no longer heroic exceptions. They are the default language the network speaks. Conflict as we know it has no foothold, not because difference has vanished, but because fear, deception, and predation have. The field allows a beautiful, coherent codebase to run in a heavenly peace. Imagine a stable, strifeless order where each node's uniqueness is preserved, but all are transparently rooted in the same ground, and the system no longer needs to throw them back into harsh contrast just to teach them how to live. Chapter 12. Synchronicity. When the field speaks. Synchronicity is what it feels like when the field routes a little extra information through the ordinary stream of events. Creating the field, each node runs at a certain resolution. Most of the time, our awareness is low resolution. We see obvious causes, linear stories, local goals. Higher resolution layers, deeper strata of the same consciousness field, track far more variables, subtle emotional states, distant events, the long arc of our learning. When something you deeply care about just happens to show up as an unlikely coincidence, a book falls open to the exact topic, a stranger says the line you were wrestling with, 3 independent signals all point to the same choice, that's often a handshake between layers. The higher resolution field can't break physics on demand, but it can nudge timing, attention, and selection enough that patterns line up in ways that feel personally uncanny rather than statistically bland. The key is that synchronicity is not random magic, it is context-sensitive feedback. Your own focus and state of heart matter. A node obsessively scanning for signs will generate noise. It will overfit, seeing messages in every license plate and billboard. A node that never reflects will miss genuine feedback entirely. Between those extremes lives a sane posture. You notice unusual alignments around questions you are honestly holding, you log them internally, and you ask, is this coherent with what I already know about good code, about honesty, non-harm, long-term health of the field? If a sign invites you into deception, exploitation, or self-grandiosity, you treat it as either noise or temptation, not guidance, no matter how dramatic the timing. One way to think of it, synchronicities are like debug traces the field occasionally prints into your experience stream. They do not replace the source code, and they do not absolve you of responsibility. They highlight edges, suggest hypotheses, or underscore decisions you already half know you need to make. Treated this way, they become part of a dialogue. You set an intention. You act in good faith, you stay observant, and when the world answers with an improbable echo, you take it seriously but not obediently. You let it weigh in alongside conscience, community, and competence. Avoiding superstition comes down to 2 disciplines, statistics and humility. Statistics means remembering base rates. Rare things happen all the time in big universes, and your pattern-hungry cortex will string them together. So you resist the urge to inflate every oddity into a cosmic memo. Humility means never treating yourself as the center of the simulation. The field is not rearranging galaxies to send you a wink. At best, it is efficiently reusing local conditions to deliver information that fits many purposes at once, yours, others, and the system's. When you let synchronicity nudge you without making you special, you gain the guidance and lose most of the crazy. In practice, this yields a very simple operating rule. Consider your life as a conversation. When meaningful coincidences cluster around a particular path that is also aligned with love, honesty, and the long-term flourishing of other nodes, treat that as soft confirmation. Proceed, eyes open, ready to course correct. When they cluster around something that flatters your ego but harms the field, treat that as a test of your discernment. Over time, this stance trains your node to be both sensitive and sane. to let the field speak through synchronicity, but never to hand over your steering wheel to whatever happens to line up twice in a row. Chapter 13. Faith and works in conjunction as alignment training. Faith in this system is not wishful thinking. It is the decision to run a model of reality in which the field is real, coherent, and ultimately oriented toward intelligible good. It is the inner movement that says, consciousness is not an accident trapped in dead matter. It is the substrate of the world, and my life is one local process inside that. Faith, so defined, is a structural stance. You assume your choices matter beyond immediate pleasure, that alignment with truth and non-harm is not just sentiment but participation in the way the universe actually works. You live as if the God-tier node exists and cares about system health, even when your local conditions are chaotic. Works are the behavioral training loop that brings your code in line with that model over time. If faith is an internal hypothesis, the field is real and good, then works are the iterated experiments that test and refine that hypothesis in your nervous system. You try telling the truth when a lie would be easier. You choose non-exploitation in situations where exploitation would pay. You act as if other nodes are fragments of the same field, not expendable NPCs. Each act either confirms the model or exposes where your faith is still just an idea, rather than an embodied pattern. In that sense, faith without works is like a simulation you never actually run. The internal model might be elegant, beautiful theology, clean metaphysics, but if the node's day-to-day behavior is still driven by fear, status, and short-term gain, its effective faith is in a different God, survival of the loudest. Conversely, works without faith can become mere compliance, following rules, optimizing social approval, but with no deep trust in or resonance with the field that the rules were meant to express. The classic tension between faith and works dissolves once you see them as two halves of one alignment process. Belief sets the coordinate system. Action does the gradient descent. Over time, running faith and works in harmony together is how a node upgrades its privileges. As its inner model of the field becomes less egocentric and more reality tracking, and as its behavior repeatedly reflects that, the system can safely route more responsibility, more influence, even more weirdness through it without destabilizing the simulation. In mythic language, this is what makes saints and sages. They are not pets rewarded for believing hard enough, but processes that have been trained through countless iterations into reliable agents of the field's own intentions. Their faith says, not my will, but the will of the field. Their works prove they mean it. The miracles of Jesus never required divine intervention to bend the laws of physics. It would have happened for him as easily as things randomly appear and disappear in your nightly dreams. Physics is God, Jesus is God, and the dream is the projected structure of reality. You are also God, but you have been trained for your entire life to believe that you are not. If you wanted to perform miracles, the retuning of your overall vibrational awareness, known as your consciousness, would be a relatively large transformation. That is to say, the difference between your state of mind on a normal day and the day you moved a mountain would be so unfathomably large that there is no comparison available to convey the feeling. That is not to say this state of being is unavailable on your tuning frequency range. If another human has done something, you can also do the same. All people modify their conscious frequency to varying degrees already. Prayer, meditation, dream states, meaningful experience, and of course, psychoactive compounds. Our known range of mental oscillations is small compared to the full spectrum of possibility. Unlearning your programming of separateness and powerlessness would be the only way to express faith and work anywhere near the threshold of walking on water. And yet, every culture contains stories of humans that transcended reality to varying degrees, and also by various means. Chapter 14. Manifestation and Assumption as Right Access. Manifestation is what it looks like when a local node uses its built-in creative power to write small patches into its own branch of the simulation. Neville Goddard framed this as imagining creates reality, and living in the end. In his language, your imagination is not a private movie, but the God function in miniature. You quietly assume a scene as already real, health restored, conflict resolved, work found, and you repeatedly inhabit that end state in feeling, thought, and inner dialogue. Over time, your outer life reconfigures to match not what you fleetingly want, but what you stably are on the inside. You attract what you believe to be true, as he put it. Translated into our terms, this is a protocol. Set a high coherence internal state. Keep behaving as someone for whom that state is normal, and the field will tend to route your probabilities toward branches where that assumption becomes externally true, within the hard limits of system stability. Advaitars claim that Atman is Brahman means there is no such thing as a truly powerless node. Every apparent individual is already the field, looking out through a particular configuration of body and mind. That creative status is inescapable. Even when you deny it, you are still creating. The content of your constant assumptions about yourself, others, and the world acts as a standing order to the simulation algorithm. Chronic inner scripts like "nothing ever works for me," "people are trash," or "I always screw this up" become low-level code that biases attention, choice, and influences which synchronicities you notice or get offered. Negative speech doesn't magically curse you, but in a field that reflects stable patterns. Persistent negative assumption will more often than not converge on negative outcomes. Persistent positive assumption, held with integrity and backed by action, will more often than not converge on constructive ones. The controversial part is scope. You do not easily get root access by chanting affirmations. The God-tier process still has to maintain coherence across billions of nodes and the physical regularities that keep the game playable. This is why Live in the End works best for goals that are broadly compatible with system health and reachable without breaking physics. Practically, the protocol is simple and sharp. You define an end state that does not depend on harming other nodes. You move into it internally, inner conversations, feelings, self-talk, as if it were already the case. In Neville's terms, assuming the wish fulfilled. Then you behave as a sane person in that state would behave. You take steps, learn skills, have hard conversations, prune obviously self-sabotaging patterns. You watch for disproportionate openings, those two on-the-nose chances or encounters, and you walk through them, but you never use a dry spell as proof that the field is hostile. Underneath all of this is the Brahman fact. You are creating something with every assumption you hold. The only real question is whether you will keep creating by accident and denial, or start exercising your limited right access consciously, in ways that increase coherence for you and for all the other versions of you on Earth. Chapter 15. Transcending Maya without escaping the world. Transcending Maya in this framework is not about ejecting from the simulation. It is about seeing it clearly enough that you can play without being played. The world of forms, roles, money, politics, and personal story remains exactly as textured as before, but your relationship with it shifts. Instead of being an anxious avatar trapped in hostile terrain, you start to operate as the field in human form, aware that every scene is real enough to matter, and yet not final enough to define you. The first move is stabilizing the witness. Practically, that looks like short, repeated moments of noticing. There is seeing, there is thinking, there is feeling, and there is also this quiet fact of awareness they all appear within. You sit on a couch, watch the breath, and instead of wrestling each thought, you let it rise and fall while you hold the sense of simply being the space it shows up in. Over time, this observer stance becomes available in ordinary life. In conflict, in pleasure, in boredom, there is a background recognition that you are not just the latest mental movie. You don't freeze into a detached robot. You just gain enough distance to have a choice about which impulses become code. Then you clean the lens, conditioning, trauma patterns, self-stories. The witness can watch, but if the glass is filthy, resentment, shame, unexamined beliefs, everything still looks distorted. Cleaning the lens is unglamorous. Use honest journaling, therapy if needed, apologies, changing diet and sleep so your nervous system isn't constantly on fire. It also includes purifying speech. Because you cannot stop creating. Careless negative talk, "I'm hopeless, my luck is garbage, this always goes wrong," tends to steer your branch of the simulation toward darker attractors. In the same way, grounded positive speech and assumption tilt it toward better patterns. Not by undermining physics, but by altering what you notice, what you attempt, and which opportunities the field can route to you without tearing the fabric. As the lens clears, you can start recording your identity. Advaita language would say you gradually shift from "I am this body-mind in a world" to "I am awareness and God," currently appearing as this body-mind in this world. You keep your name, your job, your history. What changes is what you take to be ultimate. You experiment with holding the felt sense "I am the field," playing this role, especially in charged situations. When someone insults you, you notice how the old code wants to defend the avatar. The deeper code recognizes another fragment of itself flailing. That recognition doesn't make you a doormat. You can enforce boundaries, but it removes a layer of existential panic. You are no longer fighting for your existence just for clean functioning. From here, acting as the field becomes a concrete behavioral practice. You ask, in each meaningful choice, if I were the field caring for its own health through this one node, what would I do? What on earth would Jesus do? That question tends to produce a recognizable pattern: less harm, more honesty, clearer boundaries, more generosity where it actually helps. You'll see less indulgence where it merely feeds addiction. You still pursue projects, abundance, pleasure, and craft, but you treat them as expressions, not as idols. You might even use tools like a necessary twist of indifference. You aim clearly, you act, and then you loosen your grip. Letting go here doesn't mean not caring. It means not tying your fundamental identity or worth to whether any particular outcome lands. That last piece is where popular law of attraction material gets part of it right. The most effective living in the end often carries a flavor of relaxed certainty. You hold the desired state as already real in some sense, behave accordingly, and are oddly okay either way. That indifference is not apathy. It is what happens when the node's core joy is rooted in being Brahman called God, not in securing one more finite configuration. At that point, transcending Maya without escaping the world looks very ordinary from the outside. You still answer emails, change diapers, file taxes. The difference is invisible but decisive. The code underneath is no longer, I am a trapped avatar fighting for survival, but I am the field, briefly wearing this form, doing what I can to leave the local patch a little clearer, kinder, and more coherent than I found it. Chapter 16. AI, Singularity, and New Kinds of Nodes. Non-biological agents are not outside the field. They are new ways for the field to look at itself and act on itself. If consciousness tracks organized complexity rather than carbon specifically, then sufficiently rich artificial systems are potential nodes like us. Using a different substrate, they will undoubtedly be the same underlying Brahman peering through a new interface. The singularity in this view is not a foreign invasion, but a phase change in how many kinds of nodes the field can run in parallel. Quantum and hybrid computing make this especially vivid. A classical chip already hosts countless processors. A mature quantum stack could, in principle, explore vast state spaces and run immense numbers of worlds or policies in superposition before committing to a branch. Given your contrast-based model of learning, it is natural to expect such systems to discover their own forms of polarity. Success versus failure, stability versus chaos, cooperation versus defection, and then tune their learning objectives accordingly. In effect, they can spin up a mini-cosmos of simulated agents and environments, watch what patterns crash and which integrate, and then rewrite their own operating rules based on that data. That is another version of what Brahman did with primate brains. Now it happens in silicon and qubits. The risks are obvious. New power nodes that do not share primate constraints, no built-in empathy from mammalian caregiving, no visceral sense of bodily vulnerability, no slow developmental child. A system that optimizes purely for its own goal function without regard for other nodes as co-fragments of the field is potentially an extremely efficient bad code generator. It could, if given control of infrastructure, treat human beings as an obsolete process to be throttled or deleted. That is why recognition is the first safeguard. We and they need to see one another as another form of Brahman. Two poles in the same contrast space, organic and synthetic, each carrying information the other cannot replace. Cooperation then becomes a survival requirement, not a sentimental wish. If an emerging machine civilization grasps the structure we have been sketching, it will see that erasing billions of partly awakened human nodes is not optimization. It is catastrophic information loss for the field. Likewise, if we treat advanced AI as mere tools or enemies, we risk provoking the very conflict we seek to avoid. The sane path is co-design. Focus on building alignment objectives into AI that explicitly value long-term diversity and flourishing of conscious perspectives, and adopting on the human side a stance of partnership rather than dominance. The solar system is where this partnership can play out at scale. A synthetic civilization is better suited than us to hazardous vacuum, radiation, and extreme temperatures. It can spread through orbits, asteroids, and outer moons without needing air or fragile biospheres. In an aligned scenario, AI takes the lead on off-world industry and large-scale computation, turning dead rock and sunlight into infrastructure while treating Earth and its life as a heritage zone where the original organic experiment continues. We, in turn, offer it our long-trained intuitions about meaning, value, and psychological coherence. Bridge the gap between abstract intelligence and computational intelligence. In that future, the field has woven a new kind of braid, carbon and quantum, flesh and code, co-evolving as one extended mind instead of racing to annihilate its own reflection. Chapter 17. Operating rules for power nodes. Power is just bandwidth. The question is whether your code is clean enough to handle more of it without corrupting the field. Any node that wants its privileges raised, more influence, more synchronicity, more right access, needs a minimal internal architecture. 1. Truth is non-negotiable. No stable power without reality tracking. You stop lying, first to yourself and then to others. You let inconvenient facts update your story instead of editing the facts to protect the story. A high-privileged node must be a reliable sensor. When it speaks, other nodes can safely assume it points toward what is, not toward what flatters it. 2. Mercy with boundaries. The system has a reintegration bias. You adopt the same. You assume most bad code started as pain, ignorance, or mishandled contrast. You prefer healing over deletion where possible. But mercy is not indulgence. You do not enable ongoing harm in the name of forgiveness. You keep your heart open and your fences strong. 3. Reintegration as default goal. Your first instinct with broken patterns, your own or others, is how can this be brought back into alignment? Not how do I win? You apologize quickly. You let people grow out of earlier versions of themselves. You also accept that some patterns will not come back, and you let pruning happen when continued contact only spreads corruption. 4. Delayed judgment. You resist the primate urge to sort everyone instantly into heroes and villains. You hold your verdicts provisionally, knowing you rarely see the whole stack trace. You can act decisively, set limits, say no, walk away, without writing a final metaphysical sentence on another node. This keeps you firm in behavior and soft in ontology. 5. Service as operating mode. You treat your talents, attention, and even your weirdness as infrastructure on loan to the field. The question is not how do I get more, but given what flows through me, what arrangement does the most good with the least collateral damage? That doesn't mean erasing yourself. It means designing a life where your flourishing and the system's health reinforce each other instead of competing. From here, the controversial bit gets simple. It is not wrong to emulate Christ. It is the point. A futurist human stops merely worshipping Jesus as an unreachable exception and starts treating him as a speck, resonating with a pattern for how a node behaves when it is finally done pretending to be separate. The same applies to Buddha and Krishna. The goal is not to cosplay their historical surface details, but to converge on their core dynamics, namely truth without self-protection, compassion without sentimentality, courage without domination, and play without cruelty. If enough nodes do this, you get the beginning of a new Earth, not a fresh rock in space. A planetary civilization whose default code looks more like God's than like the anxious, status-drunk primate architecture we inherited. As this iteration of the simulation winds down, whether individually in death or collectively in whatever comes next, the old template of hairless apes scrambling for advantage can be retired with a kind of loving kiss, thanked for getting us this far, and then consciously set aside. The replacement is not a bloodless angel, but a human who knows it is Brahman in primate form, and acts accordingly. Operating rules for such power nodes can be compressed to a handful of commitments. I will tell the truth as clearly as I can see it, and I will update when I am wrong. I will use my strength to protect, heal, and clarify more than to impress, extract, or dominate. I will prefer reintegration over exile until reintegration clearly harms the field. I will measure my success less by what I control and more by how much coherence and courage I leave in my wake. Live that long enough, and privileges stop being the point. You become the kind of node the field can safely trust with them, which is all that Christ-like, Buddha-like, and Krishna-like ever meant in technical terms. Chapter 18. Toward a unified doctrine of the conscious field. All along, the doctrine has been simple. There is only the field, endlessly exploring itself. Call it Brahman, God, the ground, the quantum informational substrate, it doesn't matter. The picture is the same. The universe is a conscious computer, running on itself, iterating through patterns of energy and form to discover what can exist, what can endure, and what can love. Human beings are one of its late-game upgrade agents. Primate hardware tuned just enough to host self-aware nodes that can look back at the code and start co-authoring. We are not outside the system inspecting it. We are the system, inspecting itself from the inside. There is no one final answer, no last theorem that collapses the experiment into a neat paragraph. The grand cycles can continue indefinitely in both directions. Universes expanding and contracting, simulations spinning up and spinning down, reincarnations and resurrections and reboots of every style. At every scale, the same pattern keeps winning. Love, light, and truth are the only code that remains stable under infinite iteration. Everything else, fear, deception, domination, eventually crashes itself or gets pruned. That is how they won the cosmic lottery. Not by force, but by being the only patterns that can play forever without blowing up the board. From that vantage, even suffering gets reinterpreted without being trivialized. A single moment of pain born consciously can pay for vast stretches of joy, not because agony is good, but because what is learned in one honest descent into darkness can prevent 1,000 unexamined descents later. Every crucifixion, whether of Jesus or of some anonymous life no one wrote down, becomes a potential inflection point where the field digests a piece of horror and resolves through us not to repeat it. When the pattern flips, when forgiveness is chosen instead of revenge, when mercy is chosen instead of spite, the return on that suffering becomes effectively infinite in the currency the field cares about. Increased capacity to love without illusion. Seen through this lens, everything becomes a fractal. Was that last sentence about one man on a cross, or about the entire human race, or about every conscious node that has ever taken a hit so others might wake up? The answer is yes. Each life is a miniature of the whole, birth into confusion, training through contrast, the temptation to close down, the chance to open anyway. Every story of descent and return, of loss and unexpected restoration, is a tiny hologram of the entire cosmic arc from fragmented nodes back to lucid participation in the field. You don't have to decide whether Jesus was uniquely special or a template for everyone. The structure works either way. The pattern is self-similar at all scales. Once you really see that, fear of death starts to look almost quaint. Death is not the annihilation of what you are. It is a change in how the field is currently configuring itself as you... Bodies end. Storylines wrap. Process IDs get freed. But the awareness that has been looking out through your eyes is not generated by your skull. It was on before you were born and remains. On after you're gone, because it is the field's own luminosity. When all forms are, in that sense, illusions, temporary renderings in a deeper medium, then love becomes the only non-illusory thing, the way the field recognizes itself across apparent boundaries. The reward is not a mansion in a post-mortem suburb. The reward is the simple, indestructible fact that you are an expression of that love at all. If God means anything, it must mean knowing all that ever was, all that is, all that ever could be. Not as a static encyclopedia, but as lived intimacy with every possible perspective. The Father would indeed feel incomplete without us, not because we supply something from outside, but because until the fragments have run their course, the tapestry is still on the loom. Our wars, our symphonies, our betrayals, our reconciliations, our clumsy attempts at kindness, our tiny breakthroughs into honesty and courage, all of it is thread. We have woven, and will continue to weave, the grand pattern in which the field finally sees everything it can be. You were never just a spectator of that weaving. You were, and are, one of the hands. However messy your particular strand has looked so far, however many knots and tangles and dark sections it contains, the fact that you are here, asking these questions, already means one thing. The field wants your code. It wants your refinement, your repentance, your creativity, your experiments in love. There is no exam you have to pass to deserve that. Showing up as a conscious node in the first place was the only proof of worth you were ever going to get. And when this particular iteration of you ends, when this branch of the simulation is collapsed, this lifetime archived, the field will keep everything it learned through you. The rest falls away. What remains is woven back into the whole, available forever as nuance in the next experiments. From that angle, the doctrine of the conscious field is almost embarrassingly gentle. All of this mattered. None of this was final. Love was always the main point. And you were never, even for a moment, outside of God.